Yeah, I have been a filmmaker for 15 years now with the Reds. That's kind of how I got my start. I was a full-time employee there, and I branched out after doing a few films with them, and my client list took off. But I've always kept that history side. You know, it's one thing to do commercials and do the what keeps the lights on, but there's something just magical and something that drives me is just finding out these little nuggets in history that not a lot of people talk about. And I do it. I've done it for the Reds for 15 years, and recently I've been digging into some more of the Bengals history, and it's just been a fascinating journey. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah. So we're guys. Usually Tom and I. Everybody that's viewing right now on Twitter and I'm sorry, Facebook and YouTube. Tom and I usually dig into some point on Bengals history, which really starts 1968 on. So we're going to go even back prior to that, Cam. So you've got a little prelude. You have a film coming out called, I think, Before the Bengals. But we're going to start. I'm going to show this prelude. It is a couple, 2 or 3 minutes. It really starts in the late 1800s. We get into the early 1900s. We get all the way up to the current Cincinnati Bengals. So we're going to play this short clip, and this is Cam kind of previewing his Bengals history. Before the Bengals history segment here. So I'm excited to see this. This is a first, guy. Nobody other than Cam, nobody has seen this before. So you guys are first on Sunday Night Football with Bengal Jims with this video. Shoot it.
On Monday, November the 9th, 1891, at 9:28 in the morning, the Fire Engine House Number 1 at Race and Commerce Street was alerted to a fire on the north side of 2nd Street in downtown Cincinnati. By the time Fire Chief Hughes arrived on the scene, he found the Onken picture frame manufacturing plant at 134 2nd Street engulfed in flames. The fire began when a lamp ignited oil in the building's cellar, causing an enormous explosion. Of the 3 deaths that day, 2 Cincinnati firemen, Edward Anderson and Lieutenant William Bocklidge, were killed when the ladder they were on broke in half as they attempted to contain the blaze. The other death was an employee at Onken, William Myers. Myers had been trapped in the cellar when the fire started. By all accounts, Myers was a wonderful husband and the father of 6 children. He had been with Onken for several years and learned the craft of furniture and picture frame making from his Prussian-born father. He was also very athletic and had just become a member of the recently formed West End Football Club. As news of his death spread throughout the city, many charity events were organized to financially assist Mrs. Myers and the children, who, unlike the firemen's families, had no insurance to speak of. One of those events was a charity football game to be held at the Cincinnati Reds League Park on Thanksgiving Day, November 26, 1891, at 3 o'clock. The game was organized by Myers' friend James Keenan, who was the president of the West End Football Club. The West Enders would match up against the newly formed Queen City Football Club. More than 500 Cincinnatians attended, including members of several other athletic clubs in the tri-state. Over $1,000 was raised for the Myers family, with the West Enders prevailing 5-0. This match game was football in its infancy. Association rules were much different than the football we know today. The college game had only been around for a little over a decade, and there were only a handful of football clubs in the tri-state in 1891. With the success of the benefit game, athletic clubs began forming football clubs, and in a few short years there were football teams from Price Hill, Walnut Hills, the Cincinnati Gym Club, and clubs in Covington and Newport on the Kentucky side of the river. These amateur clubs drew fairly well and established a new football fandom in Cincinnati and the surrounding river towns. Their popularity, combined with the rise of high school and college football, helped lay the foundation for professional football in the Queen City.
Kind of just update people on basically what happened at late 1800s and how that started.
Right. Well, football obviously was a lot different back then, and there was no professional football to speak of, but there were these amateur clubs that started forming around. The high school and college scene was, for a decade there, was pretty lively, but you had these men, these blue collar men that would form these athletic clubs, and one would form, another would form. Well, one of the guys, like I say in that prologue there, he dies in this tragic fire, and all of these clubs come to this charity game at the Reds ballpark, and they start talking and networking, and let's play a match game here, let's play a match game there. So they started to build more and more teams. It was kind of like that. Those were the seeds that were planted that kind of started. The foundation was laid for when the Cincinnati Celts, and then the Reds, and then of course the Bengals would come. So as those 1890s, they were very, very. It was kind of skittish where teams would rise and then they'd fall and they'd rise and they'd fall. But that's where you had Covington, Newport, you had Price Hill, Walnut Hills, the Gyms. There's so many teams that formed, and it all started with that charity football game.
And interesting. So let's kind of go from there. So that late 1800s, that fire and those amateur teams that were around the city. So let's move up a little further in time here. 1910, the Cincinnati Celts. Talk about them.
Right, the first professional football team. So originally, this film was going to come out in 2021 to have the 100th anniversary of the first professional football team. But I was also working on the Ezra Charles doc, and things kind of got with the situation we're in. Things kind of got shifted around, and I decided to go ahead and do this now because I had a little bit more time. I felt it was important, especially with this new era of Bingledom. I thought, what better way to maybe gain some new fans and maybe have an appreciation if we can kind of tie in some of the history of people that don't know it. Oh, I didn't know that, and they're going to learn something. So the Celts were a team that has just a fantastic story. They start in 1907, 1910. They're kind of hanging around as an amateur. They become a semi-pro team. I could go on and on about them, but I will give you the Cliff Notes version of how they broke Jim Thorpe's ribs in a game, and that was frowned upon. They had their coach. One of their coaches was Mel Daugherty, who his son ended up being the dance partner of Doris Day. He was the band leader after he retired from football. There's all kinds of these little stories, these little nuggets that add up. And this is in the 20s. So they become the first professional team in the NFL. They only last a year. They win one game, they lose three, but that was the foundation for professional football. And it's with the hard C. I learned that the hard way.
I was going to ask you that. I think I heard you say it earlier, but they were called. I mean, I was reading up a little bit on this too, and you probably know this, but they were called. They were known as a bunch of wild Irishmen, I think, is what they were called.
Right. And they were mostly from Miami University students that were on the team early. So yeah, they were known to have a few brawls in their day.
Yeah. And the one thing that I saw in there, they were around for a little while, and they had some pretty good years. They played a team in October of 1916 that had a 13-year winning streak, Pine Valley, Indiana, and they broke that 13-year winning streak. The Cincinnati Celts did, and won that game 9-6. So that Celts team had some really good years.
It's so fantastic, and that's like their highlight. I mean, they did have some. They were in the Ohio League. They won championships, but that game, 117 games, Pine Village won. Population of I think 300. 13 years. They never even let. I don't think they gave up a touchdown, if I'm not mistaken. And the way the Celts win the game is George Rudabush, who was a famous football player, went on to become a lawyer in Cleveland. Very smart guy. He stood behind the punter. And in those days, you could do that. You were allowed to stand behind the punter, and that person was allowed to recover the ball on a free kick. So the Celts punter punts the ball into the end zone. Rudabush runs all the way down, gets it in the end zone, and it's a touchdown. And the Celts win the game. 117 wins, gone after that one game. And Indiana still talking about that.
Yeah, Tom and I were at that game. It was great.
Jimmy tailgated that game.
I thought so.
You mentioned Rudabush. Not only did he change football rules with that play, but if you look back at his history, he invented the forward pass
exactly
a year before Notre Dame started trying it. At Denison University, where Pete Brown went. 60 years later, but. Nonetheless, he created that and just decimated teams in college. Everybody in Ohio, UC, Miami, Otterbein. And he also played in the same backfield with Jim Thorpe.
Right. And when Jim Thorpe went to play baseball, Rudabush would go play for the Canton Bulldogs, then come back and play for the Celts. So he would sub. And then he goes and he becomes a lawyer for I think 70 years in Cleveland. Just an unbelievable story. And one of those stories that nobody really knows.
Yeah, and Cam, to your point, I mean, people that are listening right now are like, no idea that, you know, right. most. But so let's go on from the Celts, that very good stretch the Celts had here in Cincinnati, and let's go on to the Cincinnati Reds football team, who didn't have a very good stretch in Cincinnati. The 1933-1934 Cincinnati Reds football team.
Right. So 10 years, fast forward 10 years, the Celts disbanded 23. The Reds come in 33 in the NFL, the new NFL. They have a meeting on July the 8th, I think it was. They admit 3 teams. It's Cincinnati, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh. Of course, Pittsburgh, right? And they start this division thing. So there's a Western division, and in the Western division and the Eastern division. So Cincinnati's in the Western division. There's Green Bay, Portsmouth, who became the Lions, Cincinnati, and the Chicago Bears and Cardinals. So, yeah, they were awful, but they were in the league. And again, the tradition continues. Whether or not they're awful, it really is irrelevant. They had fans. They were, again, part of that foundation I talked about. I think they were 3-6-1 their first year. And then in 2004, they're 0-8.
Yeah.
And then their last game was November 6th, and they played Philadelphia, and they lost 64-0. And that was it at the Baker Bowl in Philadelphia. And they're like, okay, it's time to call it quits. So they disband. So Cincinnati's without professional football again.
It's funny because I think in 19, I don't know if it was 33 or 34, they set an NFL record for the fewest points in NFL history, and only won 3 games in 2 years.
Right. And I think it was the most yards. I think it was rushing. Like they averaged the opponent 6.5 a carry or something. It was insane. It's like, what? But
good.
I think their positive contribution would be they did have some really cool uniforms and
sweet uniforms.
And they played something very rare back then, and before it was even dreamed of in baseball. They played a night football game at Corcoran Field at Xavier, where Xavier played, which was practically unheard of. That might have been the height of their popularity and notoriety, and that was it. That, and I would have loved, even though the Bengals did it later, the first Bengals, I would have loved to have seen a football field at Crosley Field.
Right, exactly.
And so, again, the Reds, not a lot of success for a few years, but then we fast forward to 1937, and we have the Cincinnati Bengals. And Cam, usually Tom and I will tie in some Bengals memorabilia, and I don't have much part of 1968, just to let you know. The only thing I do have is that picture that Jamie just popped up. I have a Tippy Dye little guy here, and he was an Ohio State superstar that he came down here and played for the Bengals. He was a big get for the Bengals.
What a story that Tippy Dye has. I mean, one of the cool things that personally for me is just behind my house here, I'm in my home studio, is Dayton, Kentucky's football field. And that is where the first Bengals scrimmage, talking about a scrimmage today, ever happened, was at the Dayton, Kentucky high school football field. And one of those people that was at that field for that scrimmage in 1937 was none other than Harry Rose, Pete Rose's father. So, and that's just like 15 feet behind me. So I always think about that when I'm taking the dogs out, about how that field plays such an important role in the formation of the Bengals. But again, the Bengals of 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, a totally different game than it is now. But again, it goes back to the history and how every single step of the way there is something that important happens. And of course, the most important thing of all for our current Bengals is what? The Bengals were named for this team.
Yeah, tell that story, Cam, how that happened. How did the Bengals get that name?
Unbelievable. I mean, Hal Pennington, who was the coach of this team, the founder, he was a famous football coach, very well respected. He names them the Bengals after sitting in his mother's kitchen and sees the stove, and the stove is a Bengal stove. And I actually saw one time, and I really wanted to buy it. It was out of my price range just to have the stove. It had the Bengal logo, like he described in interviews later. It just had this, it said Bengal, and it was a tiger across it, and he loved it. That's the name of my team. And so he names them the Bengals. And of course, fast forward to when Paul Brown has his press conference, and Hal Pennington is in the audience. He's there at this press conference, and they're looking through the scrapbook, and Paul Brown says, I named it. I wanted to tie in to the history of this city. So, I mean, it's right there in black and white. It's just an amazing story.
So the Bengals are named after a refrigerator, Cam. Is that what you just said?
A stove, but yeah.
Okay, stove.
A kitchen appliance. Think about that.
They adapted to a tiger, Jimmy.
Okay, good. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we could get into, Cam. I was so excited to have you on. You've been a great follow for many years, and if everybody remembers that's watching right now, that a few weeks ago we had a topic that Tom and I went over about Bengals, Ring of Honor. And then we started talking at the Bengals Hall of Fame and certain statues that we would want in and around Paul Brown Stadium. And Cam had done some mock-ups of those things over the years, and we shared those on a show before last or something like that. So very cool stuff, Cam. So when the Bengals do the Hall of Fame and get these things, we're going to make sure we get you in there. Tom and I are going to make this stuff happen, brother. People need to know. What are some of the sayings you said? And I can't remember it off the top of my head. I should have wrote it down. But
in order to move forward, you have to remember your past. You have to. And it's so important that we tend to, especially fans, when things go wrong, we want to yell and scream at the Bengals, deservedly so. We want to throw insults at Mike Brown. But how lucky are we to have a professional football team in this city? And not only that, but there has been a story every step of the way since football began where Cincinnati has this special place. And we kind of sweep it under the rug. The Reds get their day in the sun, but the Bengals have such a unique history that nobody talks about or remembers or they don't know. And that's why I'm glad that you guys and on Twitter, we share pictures, we tell stories to get the ball rolling so that when we do have that Hall of Fame, we've got the players like Munoz and Anderson and the family members of Hal Pennington and Mel Daugherty and Tippy Dye that could come to an event and just bring that history all together and celebrate the Cincinnati Bengals, who are our team.
It's a special part of our area and our heritage, and I think, football being such a unique game and such a special part of Cincinnati, high school, college, and the Bengals. I mean, we are the elite of the elite because we have an NFL franchise. We have the Bengals. And
Absolutely.
With that come the lows of the lows hurt that much more. But the highs of the highs are that much better. I know I've heard several sportscasters and sports historians have told me they've never seen this city so wrapped up and so energized. And I think you were out of town at the time, Cam, but that 1988 march to the Super Bowl.
Right.
Well, and I think the exciting part is, and going back and appreciating so much of the Bengals history and Cincinnati and Northern Kentucky's football history. But the great part is the best yet to come.
Exactly. Well said.
Love it. And people just don't know. Cam, you hit it in your comment earlier, right? It's, people will say, hey, Bengals don't have any history. Let me tell you something. Not only do the Bengals have a boatload of history, it goes before the 1968 Paul Brown Bengals. This city has a rich history of football, and we appreciate people like you, Cam, that's bringing us to light and help educating us and everybody that's watching and viewing right now, because this stuff needs to be told. With that being said, tell us about your film and your release and what's coming up next with that.
Right. Well, we were going to do a release in 2021. Like I said, it was going to be a Q&A event. I usually do films at libraries or small theaters in my past films. But I think with the situation being what it is, I decided to move up the date. It's going to be September 18th. It'll be free to view digitally on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and I'll be posting links and pictures as I often do as we get closer to it. But I just finished the sound for it this morning. It is ready to go. A few more tweaks here and there, and we'll be ready to rock. And I cannot wait to share it because it means a lot to me because it brings back memories of me as a kid going to Wilmington and seeing those teams with Boomer and Kenny. It also is so important to me because of the fact that, like I said before, there is a history that if we don't do it, who's going to?
That's right.
We have to do it so the future happens. We have to know the past, and we don't make the same mistakes, and we learn from it. It's so important to me. So I'm glad you guys are on board. It's going to be a lot of fun.
I think very shortly there's going to be a lot of Bengals history to embrace and celebrate and remember. But like I said, more so the current team and the future, the direction of the franchise. We saw a lot of that this weekend. It's great guys are going to be very easy to root for.
Absolutely.
So guys, everybody that's watching, make sure you follow Cam on, he's big on Twitter. He's got a Facebook page. We're reposting his things as well. Just in case you miss them, we're going to be posting those things as well. A lot of fun stuff coming through the pipeline here from Cam. But Cam, we appreciate everything you do, buddy. It was great. Tom and I were really geeked out about being able to talk to you tonight.
It's an honor to talk to the legends. Believe me.
Cam, we appreciate your time, buddy. We'll keep up with you. Thank you.
Guys. Take care.